And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, proud host of the Beyond the Budget 2025 event themed around reimagining inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Good evening. Welcome to the Friday edition of The Money Show tonight. A couple of important sort of corporate things happening today. Quite rare to see the Public Investment Corporation talking at all about its investments, really. You kind of have to wait for an annual report if you want to get hold of the PIC or for something to go very, very wrong. But for them to issue a statement today, I'm sure they'll do no interviews about it, talking about what's been happening at Barlow World, confirming that they voted against the offer, they voted against the re-election of members of the board, does just show you how concerned they are about the situation there. And obviously lots of talk around Dominic Sewela. He's the CEO at Barlow World. He was involved in the consortium that wanted to buy it over. You may remember we had a conversation with the consortium a little while ago. If I remember correctly, Dominic Sewela would end up controlling around 51% of the company. So there are all sorts of things going on there. And I get a sense with the Barlow World story, it is not done for quite some time. The standby offer has now been made as well. Just after trading ended, just at 5 o'clock on the Stock Exchange News Service, IO, largely owned by Sekunjalo, largely controlled by Dr. Iqbal Survey, confirming once again something about its financial results. I think you kind of know inevitably what I'm about to say next, that they have again delayed the publication of their annual financial results for the year to the end of August last year. And I suppose the JSE's already done what, under the circumstances, it has to do, which is suspend trading in those shares. There's such a strange sort of story around IO sometimes, and I never get the sense that we fully know everything that's going on, and I suspect that more will come from it. And then I must just mention ArcelorMittal. Today, as I understand it, probably the last full day of operation for their long steel mill in South Africa. And there are people in that community, there are families who are going to be thinking very, very worriedly about that tonight and very concerned about what's going to happen to them and the communities that are around them. But ArcelorMittal confirming it is, in fact, closing those mills after a period of negotiation with the government in which, nothing seems to have been arranged. Of course, we mustn't forget that there is still low demand for steel. So you can do what you like until that demand changes. It's a bit like platinum. There's not much you can do until that situation changes. Something else happens in the global economy. Good to hear from you tonight. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the main news internationally this week has been around US President Donald Trump, his decision to cut funding for HIV/AIDS treatment here in South Africa. The ramifications of that are very, very scary, could have a huge impact on many people in our society. It is a part of what now feels suddenly like a very transactional world. You only get what you pay for or what you can demand. Things like principle, a level playing field, multilateral institutions, all of that suddenly seems to be out of the window. Normally, if you consider the size of our economy, that would make life difficult for us. If might is right, if the stronger you are, the better you survive, we would be in a difficult position. That was certainly my thought. But the founder and CEO at Sgynia, Magda Wiezycka, says she's actually feeling quite optimistic about our place in the world, despite everything that's happening. She's on the line now from Cape Town. Magda, good evening. Good to talk to you on The Money Show again. Thank you for the time. The headlines look and feel quite scary about our place in the world. US President Donald Trump is incredibly transactional. Why are you so optimistic for South Africa?
And I do travel around the world and get exposure to a lot of different economies. And you could
we're battling, as you can hear, to understand and to hear Magda Wiezycka there. Clearly some sort of technical problem on that line. Just trying to resolve that for you here on The Money Show. Sorry about that. It is, of course, as you know, a complex time for many people. Let's just try again. And I think we will be able to speak to the co-founder of Sgynia Limited, and someone, as you know, who has played her own role here in South Africa over the years. But just try and get a better line for you on that. I think we may be able to try again. Magda, I'm so sorry about that. Good evening.
No. Good evening.
There you are.
All
okay.
good.
Why are you so optimistic for South Africa?
Since as I started saying, I travel around the world. I've spent the better part of on and off last 5 years in the UK. And, when I look at what is happening in the UK economically, what is happening in Europe economically, the mess that Trump has caused in terms of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And then when I look at, I have two sons, they live in the US. And when I look at, what they are regarding as an assault on U.S. Constitution, then all of a sudden, given South Africa, given the government of national unity and the potential stability that will bring, be it some, arms wrestling around the budget table, South Africa all of a sudden looks like a country full of promises. And, I am in Cape Town. I'm looking out of my window and I can see construction everywhere, building cranes everywhere. So things are beginning to, appear one, stable, two, a lot more positive. The things that Trump does on a daily basis are completely unpredictable. You are seeing the volatility in the markets where, frankly, it's, anyone's bet regarding what he tweets tomorrow. But, take that aside and what he can do to South Africa, which is he's already done. So we know what is going to happen in terms of HIV/AIDS programs. There is actually very little more than he can do. So, I look at the world and I actually think that South Africa is a wonderful place to be.
It's interesting. It may depend where in South Africa you are. I'm in Cape Town at the moment myself, and I can see, construction everywhere. In Joburg, unfortunately, you see potholes everywhere. It does depend where you are. Taxation is a hot issue again. Government needs to find, let's just call it 60 billion rand to pass a budget. The DA says it won't allow taxes to be raised. You're again proposing a big change in how we manage tax in South Africa. What do you think we should do?
So one interesting thing is, obviously, one of the things I've been looking at is taxes, and it's not something that I have paid a lot of attention to until I found myself in the UK. I'm one of those people who actually pays all their taxes. But when I look at, and again, speaking to tax advisors, and when you look at the different tax regimes in the world, South Africa actually has a pretty benign tax regime. When I look at, UK, you are paying some of the highest taxes in the world. So if you have a benign tax regime, you can actually look at, what are your options in terms of increasing revenue from taxes. And clearly, speaking to my own book, preferably it's not taxing the wealthy. And of course, you can't tax the poor. And, VIT increases notwithstanding, and possibly we need some of that. One needs to be a lot more innovative about how to generate tax revenue. And, one way that countries in Europe are doing it, and, Italy, Greece, Switzerland has done it for years, but Italy and Greece joined the party quite late, is to attract wealthy people by virtue of offering what they call flat tax regimes. So you get taxed on anything you earn in the country. So if you made any money in South Africa, you would get taxed on it, normal rates. Anything that you earn overseas, be it from your investments or otherwise, you would be taxed at a flat rate. And, Italy has a flat rate of 200,000 euros and Greece has 100,000 euros annual tax for anything you've got offshore. Now, when you look at, some statistics, how many people in South Africa pay tax equivalent to about 4 million rand per annum? Very few. I think it's, few thousand people. So, one of the innovative ways would be for South Africa to introduce a flat tax regime. If I look at UK, and the statistics are being tracked quite, carefully, there are 10,000, in fact, 10,800 pound millionaires who have left the UK in the past year. So that's £1 millionaire every 45 minutes.
Sure.
Let's
So
get
just to
them
be
to
clear-
South Africa.
Yeah. So this would only be for people coming into South Africa. It wouldn't be for people already here.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's for people who come into South Africa, and usually for a limited period of time, say for 10 years, something like that. Very
Thank you very much indeed. It's a fascinating suggestion, and there have been various suggestions sort of along these lines, but I think not in quite so much detail. Magda Wiezycka, really appreciate the time tonight from Cape Town, co-founder of Sgynia Limited, and of course you'll be very aware of the role she's played in our society over the years.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, let's pick up the conversation around tax. The National Treasury, as you know, looking for ways to fill the 60 billion rand funding hole in the budget without raising VAT. COSATU now suggesting the money could come from the employer portion of pensions that would normally be paid into the government employees' pension fund. The parliamentary coordinator at the Congress of South African Trade Unions is Matthew Parks. Matthew, good evening. What are you proposing here? All right, sorry about that. We do seem to be having some sort of problem there with that. I can hardly hear Matthew, unfortunately. It does seem that there's some kind of issue. We're just trying to resolve that. We were able to resolve it very quickly a moment ago with Magda. I think we can speak to Matthew Parks. Now, Matthew, good evening.
Hi, Stephen. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Don't know what that was. What are you proposing here?
No, look, basically, I think, number one, we want to assist government to find solutions. We don't want to see government impose another austerity budget. We don't want to see government come with tax hikes upon the poor, especially VAT. So we've offered them about 8 or so different options. I'm not saying these are must be, but we've offered options that, can we shift some of the infrastructure expenditure to the PIC, which does that kind of work all the time? Can we ask the PIC to run on some of the employment programs? We've also suggested that they engage with the Reserve Bank on the GFRECA, the foreign exchange options.
Matthew, are you still with us? All right, it seems to have lost Matthew Parks again. We do need him to explain the subject because it is an important topic. And as you know, there are, of course, people who have a huge hole to fill in the fiscus in terms of government spending, and they will be looking for any kind of option that is actually on the table. Let's just try again. Matthew, I think you're back with us. You're saying this is one of several options. How would this particular option, taking money from pensions, actually work? All right, Matthew Parks seems to have disappeared, unfortunately. I do apologize for that. As I understand it, and I don't want to put words in COSATU's mouth, but as I understand the suggestion, the Government Employee Pension Fund is funded to 110% of its value at the moment. In other words, there is a surplus, and because it's a defined pension fund, in other words, government always will make sure that workers are actually paid. As a result of that, you could then have a situation where there would be enough money. I suppose the question would then boil down to quite a simple one, which is, yes, it would be a short-term fix. It would solve some problems, but you would be taking from the future to pay for today. And that is what would really concern me, is that the consumption issue would really be the problem that we have. And I think that is certainly the thing that I think is going to be very, very difficult. And I think that might well be the problem that we're going to actually have, is simply that what you're doing is taking money from someone's pension for the future. And I think that is going to be interesting. All right, Matthew Parks back now with us. Matthew, I do apologize for all of this. What exactly then, how would this work? Where would this pension money come from? All right, we're going to resolve some of those problems as best we can. You're with The Money Show. It's 21 minutes after 6. It's Friday.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Let's try again, shall we? Trying to speak to Matthew Parks, the parliamentary coordinator at COSATU, to understand the proposal that they're making to fill the hole in the budget. Matthew, good evening. You're suggesting the money come from pensions. How would it work? All right. Right. I think, and I'm afraid to say, that we are probably going to have to give up this conversation. It's quite an important conversation that we have planned to have. Dr. Azar Jamin was going to be a part of this as well, just to try and understand, the situation that we would actually be looking at and how this would work. Of course, all sorts of issues that we are really trying to get to on this, because there are so many different things that you would like to investigate, like to be able to talk about. And we understand, of course, that the pension issue is a major issue that you would be looking at. So it is, of course, something that we do want to continue the conversation with and just try and sort of understand, exactly how this is going to work and see if we are able to have that conversation. But we will try and continue that conversation in just a moment. Also coming up on the Money Show this evening, we'll be looking at the situation around cuisine. And wherever you go in the world, there's a kind of strange thing that if you think of fine dining, if you think of fine cuisine, if you think of anything like that, you automatically, I suppose for some reason, think of something that is French. If you're expecting to read that in a French menu for some reason. And I think that really does tell us a little bit, tell us something about how the world is, and see if we're able to go with that. All right, you're with the Money Show. It's just gone 25 minutes now after 6 the time.
702.
702.
Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
I'm reliably informed Matthew Parks does join us now, the spokesperson at Kasatu. Matthew, good evening. Thank you for staying with us through all of this. I do appreciate it. You want to take money from pensions, sort of. How would this work?
Hi, Stephen. Hopefully the lines are okay. Look, basically not to take money from the pensions, but to give government as an employer a 1-year contribution holiday. And that would just basically mean they don't need to pay money into the pension for a year. It's a holiday. They would not need to borrow money. They would not need to pay it back per se, but give them breathing space of a year to sort the financial problems, the revenue challenges, the expenditure review, and so on. And the reason why you can do that is because normally pension funds are required to be funded at 75%. The government employee pension fund is funded at 110%. And what that means in simple terms is that if every single public servant retired tomorrow, there was never any more contributions going to the GPF. The GPF can not only pay every pension fund member what they were due for the rest of their life, but it would have change left over. The GPF is not a normal pension fund. It's a defined benefit scheme, so it's based upon your years of service and your salary level in the state. And whether the pension fund does well or doesn't do well, your pension fund remains guaranteed, it remains as is. So I think that's why you said there will not be a plan A or plan B or plan C, but if government really is in trouble, it could be a plan Z. But they would have to go and engage the GPF and just see what could they afford, what are the conditions. We think there are some conditions that could be put in place. A guarantee in the wage agreement, a commitment to filling public service vacancies, rebuilding the state, honouring inflation-linked increases for pension fund members. But also you would need to have a commitment as well to improve the revenue collection, because this could only be a once-off solution. It couldn't be a permanent solution.
The risk, of course, is that you do it once and then you have to do it again next year. And isn't that a problem?
No, that is a fear, and that's why we're glad that Treasury was very reluctant on this issue. We would want Treasury because it's not an easy thing to do. There would be some public criticism because it can't be a bailout. Government's got to resolve its issues. It's got to improve expenditure. It's got to remove the fat and the wastage of the state. It's got to deal with corruption. It's got to improve tax compliance as well. But I think we've said to them, look, if you're in absolute crisis and you're in danger of imposing tax increases which will hurt the poor, you're in danger of going back to austerity budget cuts which will weaken the state, you could have a plan Z, but this could only be an emergency plan. It can't be a normal plan, it can only be once off.
I mean, I suppose the strange thing is that, at last year's budget, it was the Golden Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve account. This year's budget, it's the government employees pension fund. What could be next? The point I'm getting to is,
sure,
I understand where we are. It's the principle. Once you cross this line, then you move to the next line. Then you move to the next line. And you get in deeper and deeper trouble, would be the argument.
No, that's why we have to do a bit of tough love. Government's got to sort out its issues. And surely within a budget of 2 trillion rand, there is ways for expenditure that can be reduced. And surely when we have a 64% tax compliance rate, we need to improve tax collection because it does not make sense, to be honest, to add new taxes, especially upon the poor, where you're not collecting 800 billion rand of taxes already owed to the state. And also, ultimately, Stephen, you're right. We're putting plaster on the wound, and the fundamental solution is to fix the state, to grow the economy, to create jobs, because that's the only way to get us out of this quagmire. What we're doing for the last decade is to dance around the issue, not to deal with the fundamental issues. But, we also can't afford for government to implode. We can't afford for government to go to IMF. So if government's in a crisis, and we don't think this thing's unmanageable, we don't think there is a need to go to the pension fund. We think there is a way to fix the state, even if it's difficult. It's not easy, but you got to do it. But ultimately, we would never want to see government go to the IMF, because that would be a situation which would be far, far worse.
We'd rather be in control of what we can control, and this we can control. I apologize for the conspiracy nature of this question, Matthew, but this could be a hard sell to workers. And if I were a clever person sitting in the National Treasury and I thought, I've got an idea, I can solve this problem, but I need workers to be convinced, I'm going to ask my friends at Kasatu to make the proposal. That did not happen, right?
No, you're right. It did not happen. And in fact, when we've talked to Treasury, reassuringly, they are not keen on this idea, which is a positive thing. We would not want them to be keen on this idea. Because really, this is a plan Z. Before you get to plan Z, let's go through every other plan in the book. And again, because you're right, the ordinary member of the public, and one can explain is a defined benefit scheme, that there's significant reserves, the space to do it. But after a decade of state capture and corruption, society is right to be skeptical of the state. We are skeptical of the state. And ultimately, this would only be an interim solution. You really need to do the hard issues of wasteful expenditure, of fixing the state, of growing the economy, of creating jobs, because everything else we do is not a solution. Borrowing money is not a solution. Increasing taxes upon the poor is definitely not a solution. But look, this is our government too. Irrespective of which party you vote for, we can't afford to see it go under. We need to help it with solutions. And this is just one idea. We've given about 10 ideas. Some of them may make sense, some of them may not make sense, some of them may not be practical. We wanted to assist government to say, here are different options from revenue to expenditure to assist you, because ultimately we need government to work, we need the economy to grow, we need to create jobs.
Matthew Parks, I really appreciate the time, and thank you so much for bearing with us on The Money Show, the Parliamentary Liaison Officer at the Congress of South African Trade Unions.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Well, it's here now, a little bit later than we would have planned, from Zwelakhe Mnguni, the Chief Investment Officer at Benguela Global Fund Managers. Zwelakhe, good evening, and thank you for your patience tonight. At the JSE, very, very tough day on the JSE, largely driven, I presume, by resource shares, and that's because platinum, but particularly gold prices, are so much weaker.
Yeah, indeed, Stephen. Good evening to your listeners. So we saw the platinum stocks and the gold stocks coming under a lot of pressure, and amongst those, we saw Anglo Gold being down 4%, and M+ being down 5%, and we also saw motors coming under a lot of pressure today, again on top of what we saw yesterday.
I was intrigued as to why the gold price was so much lower. Last week, I think it was Tuesday, Wednesday last week, it went to $2,950 an ounce. Then today, it's $2,838. That's over $100 a decline in value. The only thing I could think of, and you'll be better informed than I, is that the possibility of Russian production for both platinum and gold might well be playing a role here.
I think that's one of the key factors that one has to consider in the price move. So, as you know, the Russians were locked out of the market for quite some time, and the resolution of their conflict in Europe would probably allow them or enable them to supply the market with some of the stockpiles. The second thing is that with the geopolitics tensions coming down, if peace is found in Europe, we will see that the geopolitical premium in the gold price will basically deflate out of it.
For us, gold is not that big, but it still kind of matters. Gold's provided a little bit of a softening factor. When other currencies are in trouble, it seems to have helped the rand a little bit. So for gold to go softer and stay softer, especially when there were predictions quite recently that it would go to $3,000 an ounce, that would have consequences for the JSE. It would have consequences for the rand, I presume.
Yeah, I think the rand has actually weakened by a little bit. I think about 13 cents. To about 8.59. I think we did like 18.30 something in the week. The ultimate thing is that when people feel a bit nervous, they'll move to the dollar, and sometimes if there are factors that are affecting gold in particular or other commodities, we could see that it does deflate a little bit. But I think the long-term picture remains that there is a shift away or intended shift away from the US dollar, and we are seeing central banks, particularly India and China, continue to buy gold. So not bullish in the short term, but I think long term it might actually be still constructive.
It's very interesting to watch it play out. The JSE today down quite sharply. I mean, you mentioned Motus. They were down, I think it was 13-14% yesterday, down significantly, over 4%, nearly 5% again today. And Graham Kerner made the point to us last night on the Money Show that he felt markets were quite skittish, nervous, and as a result, there was almost an overreaction to any kind of bad news. Motors had an update yesterday. It wasn't a strong update, talking about the fact people are buying fewer new cars, cheaper new cars when they have to. And yet to be punished to that extent doesn't seem, I suppose, rational. Would you agree with that? Is there a kind of overreaction to bad news at the moment?
I do agree with that, Stephen. I think it's also what we are seeing is there is a big overreaction across the SA Inc. stocks, and any bad news that comes through basically gets extrapolated to a sector or to the whole market. So I think the motor situation is probably, there are valid concerns there that they are losing market share to cheaper vehicles. But it's not a fatal failure in their strategy. So they seem to be looking for ways to address that. And in the longer term, I mean, if we get rates coming down, which is now in doubt with all the things that Trump is doing, if rates come down, they should still see an improvement in the demand for vehicles, and they should benefit. But I think the market has overreacted quite largely.
I mean, there's a little bit of overreaction kind of everywhere. Cryptocurrencies are down dramatically in the last little while as well, and nothing's really changed for them. Just they had such a big rush when Trump was elected, and since then nothing's really changed, and I suppose that's the disappointment. I just get a sense that investing right now is much harder than it's been for quite some time. The environment's very uncertain. Even gold, which is supposed to be the safe haven, suddenly is not as certain as it was a week ago.
No, certainly. I think the macro factors are a major driver, or at least the macro news. I think we saw also today that the U.S. consumer data came through. It was not as good as expected, and it's 2/3 of the U.S. economy. So that meant that people are starting to be cautious about the outlook. But I think further down, I think one is looking at whether consumers slow down. What does it mean for rates? And naturally, if we see a major slowdown in consumer spending, we should see rates moving lower as the Fed tries to prevent a recession. But on the other side, you have these tariffs that are being implemented by Trump, and they could lead to an inflationary situation. So there is a difficult analysis, and your point about the market being difficult to play at this moment, I think is valid.
There are other things that are going to be happening over the next little while, and I suppose the market is looking for direction in different ways. And I presume what's happening in Europe in particular, I mean, the idea just a week ago that someone could come close to winning a German election, be the leader of the biggest party after an election, and immediately start talking about how Germany needs a nuclear deterrent, I mean, it's just frightening. Is the situation in Ukraine the next thing that's going to drive market action, do you think? Is that what the markets are watching?
I think it's going to be a major factor, and I think we've seen from the defense sector in Europe. I mean, those stocks have been running quite aggressively. I mean, BAE Systems, Rheinmetall, they all have been increasing. And it looks like there is also an expectation that the local expenditure on, or at least the defense budgets would give local companies priority. So they've outperformed the U.S. Lockheed Martin, those type of defense companies. They've outperformed them by quite a wide margin. So the European situation is fluid from a perspective of there is no U.S. backing what can the Europeans actually come up with their own defense system? And that's where the nuclear deterrent in Germany has been.
All right, we seem to have lost Zwelakhe Mnguni there. Thank you very much indeed, Chief Investment Officer at Benguela Global Fund Managers. Zwelakhe, thanks very much indeed.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud host of Beyond the Budget 2025 event, themed around reimagining inclusive and sustainable economic growth.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
Well, obviously lots to talk about today, and we're going to be talking about fine dining in just a moment and trying to just get an understanding of how fine dining is changing and what exactly is actually happening around it. So that is what we're going to be looking at. That is really the thing that I think is going to be very, very interesting, and that essentially there are so many different things that we can talk about when we talk about food and about how food actually works. And I think there are other questions too around the kind of things that we can just put together when it comes to food. And often when you talk about food, when you talk about fine dining, you end up reading some menu that seems to pride itself on its ability to misspell French. And if it's not French, maybe it's Italian. And of course, there's no such thing really, I suppose, as British or American fine dining. All of this means that there's a fantastic opportunity to create an African or a South African fine dining experience. And someone who's been working towards just that is the chef, Vusi Ndlovu, and he joins us now. Chef, good evening. Thank you. I know Friday night's a busy time for you. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
No worries. Good evening. I don't even know what time it is. Good evening.
Good evening,
Hope
yes.
you guys are well.
I'm good, thank you. I must confess, when someone sort of talks to me about fine dining, and I was sort of sad to confess this to myself, I almost immediately think of something European. You're going in a completely different direction.
I mean, if you think about where everything fancy came from in terms of like the South African hospitality scene, most of the big chefs came from like Europe, Germany, Switzerland, and that was the standard of like fancy hotels back in the day, right? And fine dining, you think crisp white clouds, you think all of that, porcelain, silver, crystal, everything opulent, right? So that's the perception of silver. That's fine dining, like anniversary, occasional restaurants, if you will. So my direction is not to say that we're not really fine dining. We're just like really well curated and well thought out, if you will. We don't have the budget for the white tablecloths, but we do have the same level of food.
This is going to sound like a strange question, but what makes one dish French and another dish South African?
I think terminology is a big thing. So if you go to school, like chef school, that's the first chapter of the whole cooking course, right? French classic mother sauces. So you get taught about a bechamel, a tomato sauce, a hollandaise, and these are all French things that derive from the French community. So everything is based on that. That's the backbone of the sort of industry. And I think people have taken that and made it their own throughout the years. So French is French, and it's just basically the terminology and the history of the dishes. And yeah.
I mean, I think for someone like me who's not an expert on food at all, the ingredients are a big part of it. You take great care over the ingredients that you use. You're using ingredients, you're putting together things that you won't find in other places.
Yeah. So I think since I started this journey with Absa a few years ago, I think our biggest thing was I wanted to celebrate the smaller producers. Like everyone says that. So I think we take greater care in celebrating quality over creativity. So if you have a great tomato, a great piece of pork, you don't have to do much to it, just 1, 2, 3, then everything is on point, then you're happy to go. So if you don't have a good product, then you kind of have to like work it, So I think for us, the product, we'll take our time to find the right kind of pork before we celebrate it. You get people that do oysters very well, that do mussels very well. So they take their time to find the right oyster. So it's like mushrooms, like in Cape Town, when it's autumn season and it's raining, everyone's got their secret patches where they forage for mushrooms. So it's one of those things where if you take pride in your ingredients, then everything, the work is done for you. That's half the job.
I've been in some hotels to meet with people from other countries, and these will be sort of more expensive hotels in Joburg, and they will say, there'll be a sort of salad, and that's their attempt to do something you can't do. And it's basically a salad with biltong, okay? It's nothing more sophisticated than
African
that.
as gets.
Yeah, that's what it is, which says so many things. How do you go well beyond that? I mean, when you're conceptualizing, when you're thinking of something, how do you go so far beyond that?
So my biggest question is that I don't want to scare you. There's no shock value to what we do. I'm not trying to like scare you or like make you like, no, serve you something familiar in a different context. So even, let's say, for example, like your fancy hotel, you always have a Waldorf salad, right? Which has got the nuts and the apples and whatever. That everyone knows what that is and everyone's comfortable with that. But now, how do you now interpret ingredients that are different in a comfortable manner? So if you meet people in the middle, like I kind of meet you halfway, but I'm not going to bastardize the dish and make it into, I'm going to do like a biltong risotto. Because what is that? There's no such thing, right? It's either it is or it's not. Or like if we do a samp risotto, there's no such thing because risotto is made from arboreal rice and hence the terminology. Samp is samp. If you go overseas, right, and people are proud to call the ingredients in their dishes what they are. Like in South Africa, we have a problem where we like to call things indigenous because we're scared to say the names. But if you go to China, they will tell you that this is this 1, 2, 3 fish, eat it as it is, go crazy. And no one's apologetic about it. So we're not scared to say their names. We're not scared to use the words. We're not scared to say, okay, cool, this is what we are serving you. This is a Nguni cow that was raised in the Eastern Cape. Blah, 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 blah. It's a bit more chewer. It's on the chewier side. So please expect that because as South Africans, well, I hope that we're not scared of chewing our meat. So this is what we're serving you. Please enjoy. But if you go to Europe, they say, dairy cow, ex-Jersey beef. So the dairy cow lived for 50 years. There's a big story about it. But it's more chewier than you'd expect. But because it's a beautiful story, because we package it differently, people now tend to go for it. So that's how we go out. We would like to package it in a way that you understand it. And now you feel like you learned something. I'm not going to show you how clever I am. The suppliers have done that for us. So our job is just to say, put it on the fire, put a bit of salt, slice it, send it. It's not that simple, but yeah.
Yeah. And look, their cows, as far as I know, can never walk over sand dunes and onto a beach.
Exactly. And just chill out.
Are people coming back to eat what you're cooking because the people that you serve could eat in many, many places, right? I presume.
I think it's funny you say that, sorry, because literally the table of three that just came in, they come in every February from Cape Town, from the UK. They come and spend time with us every time. Since Mount Nelson days, since every other iteration we've ever done of those concepts, they've always been there, and it's always like something different. It's a mother, father, and they're always like so excited, and they're just like, listen, let's just go crazy, we at your mercy. And it's such a beautiful experience because I think we get more love from overseas guests because the South Africans are just a bit more like South African. But when you open a sushi joint next door, they're all there, you know. So it's a bit frustrating, but people do come back, and there's a nice following that we've created. And there's a nice sort of understanding that we've created.
There's an interesting thing there because, you know, do Italian people go to an Italian restaurant? Okay, it's a silly question. But so you could argue, well, South Africans aren't going to be that interested. But there is a chance. There's a chance to create something new, is what I was going to say.
I think that's the problem because let's say you're from Joburg, right? Where do you go for Wednesday for a steak? Marble, right? You go to Marble, you go to 40 Grow or something like that, or Hassa Grow or Old Blackman, all those known steakhouses, right? Because it's safe. When I grew up, for us it was Spur because of the salad bar back then. I'm showing my age. So we knew that was our South African meal. So now South African food is probably not the food itself, but the feeling. Yeah, monkey gland sauce, no one has it, but no one really cares. But when you go to Spur, you know it's Friday. You just got your report card. Maybe you got 1 or 2 A's and maybe 1 C, but it's okay. Then it's like bottomless ribs, and it's a good time, right? And there was trust like with that. So I think South African eating is a cultural thing. So if you try to now decipher it into more of a regional thing, like we eat like this in Joburg, because I know Joburgers come to Cape Town in December, and they want oysters with Tabasco and lemon, and that's fine. But in Cape Town, we're doing this whole fancy salad on top, which is okay also. So it's about a culture of how to eat. That's what South Africa is. That's what I understand it to be. So if you go to, let's say we take a road trip now through the Karoo or whatever, and then we know that, okay, the Karoo is like this. We're going to stop at a pasta when I get some roaster cook and something, and when I get some biltong for the trip, and when I get some beers. Don't drink and drive, but still. That's the South African-ness of it. But when you go to France, you have to go buy baguette, buy some fancy cheese, because that's the norm, right? So South Africans, what we forget is that we try to identify. South Africa is like so big. If you take the Eastern Cape culture, for example, there's like 17,000 micro ecosystems within that. How they make umfi, is very different from the next door neighbor who's across the road. So you can't define it.
Chef, it's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Awesome.
And thank you for taking time out on a busy Friday night. Chef Vusi Ndlovu on The Money Show.